The following is an encore presentation of Everything Everywhere Daily. Weather systems on Earth aren't stable. There are cycles that weather patterns go through which can have enormous effects around the globe. And there is probably no more important weather cycle than the one meteorologists have called the Southern Oscillation. This cycle can have dramatic implications for temperatures and rainfall all over the world. Learn more about El Niño, La Niña, and the Southern Oscillation on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. I have a brand new sponsor to the podcast that I'm excited to tell you about, ButcherBox. If you're unfamiliar with ButcherBox, they're a service that ships high-quality meats and seafoods directly to your door every month. And by high quality, I mean 100% grass-fed beef, wild-caught salmon, heritage breed pork, and free-range chickens, with no antibiotics or added hormones. And I speak from firsthand experience when I say that this level of quality can be very difficult to find at most local grocery stores. The way it works is that you sign up for a box of your choice, either a custom or curated box, and then every month you'll receive a box of high-quality meat. Depending on your choice, it will be enough to provide meat for 24 to 60 meals a month. Shipping is free, and everything arrives at your door frozen for freshness. You can get free chicken nuggets for a year and 10% off your first box when you sign up today. That's a 22-ounce bag of gluten-free chicken nuggets in every order for a year when you sign up at butcherbox.com/daily and use promo code DAILY. Once again, that's butcherbox.com/daily, promo code DAILY. This episode is sponsored by American History Tellers. American History Tellers is a podcast from Wondery that explores the events and people who shaped our collective history. Their newest season looks at the insurrection of Aaron Burr, a founding father who fought valiantly for the revolution and would later become the highest-ranking American official ever charged with treason. Nearly 200 years after his death, Aaron Burr's legacy remains hotly debated by historians. After all, he was a hero of the Revolutionary War, served as a United States Senator, and even vice president. But Burr had his fair share of controversy, killing Alexander Hamilton in a duel and conspiring to take America's western frontier as his own to rule over like an emperor. On American History Tellers, you'll learn more about Burr's desperate power grab, how it was thwarted by Thomas Jefferson, and how our democracy endured its first stress test. If you enjoy deeper dives into historical subjects, then I highly recommend American History Tellers. Follow American History Tellers wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen ad-free on Amazon Music or the Wondery app. The El Niño phenomenon was originally named by Peruvian fishermen back in the 17th century. They noticed that sometimes the waters would often get warmer around Christmas time. They named this effect El Niño, which means little boy in Spanish. When capitalized, El Niño refers to the Christ child, and it gets its name from the fact that it happened at Christmas. In the 1930s, a meteorologist by the name of Sir Gilbert Walker realized that a meteorological phenomenon called the Southern Oscillation always occurred with what the locals called El Niño. To understand what happens during an El Niño, it's necessary to understand the circulation of water in the Pacific Ocean. Under normal conditions, cold water will come up to the surface off the western coast of South America. This cold water is great for fishing as it brings up nutrients and plankton, and it's one of the reasons why the Pacific waters off of South America are so good for fishing. This cold water begins to warm up as it reaches the surface, and it is transported roughly along the equator towards Asia and Australia. Along the way, the heat of the sun in the Pacific Ocean warms this water, and it's one of the reasons why parts of Asia along the same latitude, such as Indonesia, are so hot. This current will then take the warm water down the eastern coast of Australia, down to Antarctica, where it will work its way back to South America and start all over again. This is how it normally works. Ocean currents can change, however. Every few years, the transport of warm water from east to west can sometimes reverse. Warm water from the equator will move eastward towards South America. This is the warm water phenomenon that the 17th century fishermen off Peru found and named. And this is El Niño. Because the Pacific Ocean is so big, this change in warm water currents can change weather patterns globally. The reason why the fishermen recognized and named this phenomenon is that it was horrible for fishing. The nutrients which came up to the surface with the cold water were no longer coming up with warm water. The areas which see the largest weather changes are in the Americas. On the west coast of South America, they'll see more rainfall with the moist, hot air hitting its coast. Chile will tend to have milder winters, and across the Andes into the Amazon basin, there will usually be less rain. During an El Niño event, northern states in the United States and western Canada tend to have warmer winters, southern states tend to have more precipitation, and the eastern part of the United States tends to be drier. In Antarctica, the Ross Sea, which is south of the Pacific Ocean, will see less ice formation and higher temperatures, whereas the Weddell Sea, roughly south of the Atlantic Ocean, will see lower temperatures and increased ice formation. In Asia, El Niño will reduce precipitation and can cause droughts. The driest Februaries in recorded history in Singapore, where weather records have been kept the longest, all coincide with El Niños. Australia likewise sees lower rainfalls with cooler temperatures in northern latitudes and higher temperatures in the southern latitudes. There is a third phenomenon that can also happen in this region, and it's known as the anti-El Niño, or as it is colloquially known as La Niña, which just means little girl, signifying it is the opposite of an El Niño. It is also sometimes known as El Viejo, or the old man. During a La Niña event, the cold water from the west coast of South America gets pushed up further than normal. The result is usually the opposite of what would happen during an El Niño event. Precipitation on the coast of Peru and Chile is usually less, but rainfall in the Andes can be more. In North America, Canada and northern states tend to have colder winters. Southern states tend to be much drier than normal, and the eastern part of the country tends to be wetter. In Asia, cyclones can be pushed further west, threatening mainland Asia. Likewise, there can be increased rainfall in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia. Eastern and northern Australia likewise see more rainfall as well. The average length of time for an El Niño event is 7 months to 2 years, and the average length of time for a La Niña event is 5 months to a year and a half. While these events do occur every several years, they aren't really predictable. You can't pencil it in on your calendar. There is a period of almost 20 years from the early 1920s to the early 1940s where there were no El Niño events at all. The period coincided with the Dust Bowl. They will usually appear between 2 and 7 years. On the other hand, there have been cases of El Niño events happening within a year of each other. Likewise, not every El Niño or La Niña event is the same. Some are stronger than others. The El Niño events of 1982 and 1983 and 1997 and 1998 were the strongest recorded. Others tend to be rather weak. The coldest temperatures I've ever personally experienced were in 1996 in Minnesota. Temperatures reached -40 in the Twin Cities where I was living, and that's so cold that it's the same temperature in both Fahrenheit and Celsius. The record low temperature for the state of Minnesota was set that year at -60 Fahrenheit. Sure enough, when I checked, it was a La Niña winter. As far as researchers can tell, these cycles of El Niño and La Niña have been going on for thousands of years, at least since the end of the last ice age. Once the El Niño-La Niña cycles were figured out and we knew what they did to the weather, it wasn't too hard to go back and see just how they affected history. Much of this could be told through the story of dendrochronology or tree rings. A fishery collapsed in 1972 off the coast of South America, and it was due to an El Niño event. When the fisheries collapse, it can result in fewer seabirds feeding, which can affect guano and fertilizer production. El Niño events may have resulted in droughts and famines, which caused the collapse of some pre-Columbian cultures in Peru. Cyclones and droughts in India may have been caused by El Niño and La Niña events. A strong El Niño between 1789 and 1793 might have caused poor harvests in Europe, which was one of the sparks for the French Revolution. In 1998 and 2015, low rainfall in Panama led to reductions in the size of some ships which could go through the Panama Canal. And in 1876, famine in northern China killed up to 13 million people, and it was in part due to an El Niño event. As I'm recording this, weather services are reporting that for the second year in a row, a La Niña event is forming. That will probably mean low temperatures this winter where I live, more rain in places like Seattle, and less rain in Arizona and Southern California. Depending on where you live in the world, the El Niño-La Niña cycles might be responsible for much of the weather you experience. The Earth has an interconnected web of weather, and one of the biggest drivers of that weather all has to do with cold water currents off of the western coast of South America. The associate producers of Everything Everywhere Daily are Peter Bennett and Thor Thomsen. If you'd like to support the show, please join the list of patrons over at patreon.com. And also remember, if you leave a review or send me a question, you too can have it read on the show.